They say the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. They come from the people you raised, fed, and trusted with everything. When I woke up after surgery, my daughter had already taken something I thought no one ever could, my home. The first thing I heard when I woke up was the steady rhythm of machines, soft, mechanical, almost comforting. The white walls of the hospital seemed endless, as if I had drifted into some quiet world far away from my home. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. The drugs from the surgery still fogged my mind, and everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and flowers that had started to wilt on the side table. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see my daughter sitting by the window, maybe reading a magazine or scrolling through her phone. She'd promised me she'd be there when I woke up. She'd even kissed my forehead before I went into the operating room and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything." But the chair by the window was empty. So was the second one near the door. And the flowers, the ones I assumed she'd brought, didn't have her usual little note tucked between the petals. The nurse came in with a soft smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris," she said gently, adjusting the foreline. "How are you feeling?" "Stronger," I lied. My throat felt dry, and a part of me still ached in a way the painkillers couldn't reach. "Has my daughter been by?" The nurse hesitated just a little. "Not since yesterday evening, ma'am. I believe she said she had some things to take care of at home." I smiled politely and nodded, though my stomach twisted. Some things to take care of at home. That was strange. She told me she'd stay nearby. She'd been so attentive before the operation. Every day she brought me home-cooked meals, filled out forms for me, insisted I let her handle all the boring stuff. But now, with me confined to this bed, and the world reduced to four pale walls, she'd disappeared. By the afternoon, the silence began to press in on me. I picked up my phone from the bedside drawer and dialed her number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Mom." Her voice sounded flat, almost irritated, not the warm tone I was used to hearing. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just woke up. The surgery went well. The doctor said I'll be discharged in a few days." "That's good," she said shortly. "Listen, I've been busy, so I couldn't come today." Busy? That word stung more than I wanted to admit. "That's all right," I said softly. "I just wanted to check if everything's fine at the house. You know how nervous I get leaving it for too long." There was a pause. A long one. Then she said, in a tone that made my chest tighten, "Mom, you don't need to worry about the house anymore." Something in her voice wasn't right. Cold. Detached. Like she was reading from a script she didn't want to say out loud. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Another pause, longer this time. "I sold it. At first, I thought I'd misheard her." You what?" "I sold the house," she repeated, almost impatiently. "It's better this way, Mom. You'll be with me now. I've already arranged everything." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. The sound of the heart monitor spiked, matching the rush of blood in my ears. I clutched the blanket, trying to steady myself. "You sold the house." I whispered. "The house your father and I built." "It was time," she said firmly, as if she were explaining something obvious. "That place was too big for you. Too old. It needed repairs, taxes were high, and I can't keep running back and forth. This way, you'll be with me and safe." Her words were smooth, too smooth, almost rehearsed, as if she had already had this conversation a dozen times in her head before I'd even woken up. I swallowed hard. "You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me you were thinking about it." "Because I knew you'd say no," she snapped, her patience thinning. "Mom, you're too old to handle property. I did what's best for you." The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear my heartbeat over the machines. Too old to handle property. I'd survived childbirth, widowhood, and 50 years of hard work, but apparently I was too old to own my own home. That house wasn't just walls and wood. It was the first place your father and I could call ours. We'd saved for years, working double shifts, eating dinner on milk crates before we could afford furniture. Every nail in those walls carried a memory. The day he built the porch, the time we painted the kitchen yellow because he said it felt like sunshine, the marks on the doorframe where we measured our children's heights. That house was my life, the physical proof of every sacrifice we'd ever made. And now she had sold it, without a word. I couldn't even find the strength to argue. I just listened as she went on, her voice strangely proud. "Don't worry, the buyers were thrilled. I got a good deal, $480,000. It'll help cover your care, Mom. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word felt like poison. I hung up soon after, unable to respond. The nurse must have seen the color drain from my face, because she rushed in and asked, "Are you all right, Mrs. Harris?" I managed a weak smile. "I'm fine," I lied again. But I wasn't fine. My whole body trembled, not from pain, but from betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of hospital equipment, and wondered when my daughter had stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a burden. It wasn't until days later that I learned the truth, a truth that made every sleepless night worth it, because what my daughter didn't realize was that what she sold didn't legally belong to her. The house had been in our family for 40 years, a modest two-story with chipped white paint, ivy creeping up the sides, and a magnolia tree in the front yard that had outlived every family argument we ever had. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It carried the scent of our history, fresh bread from Saturday mornings, paint from a dozen remodels, and the faint aroma of coffee my husband brewed before sunrise every day of his life. We bought it when we had nothing, just two newlyweds with worn-out shoes, a borrowed pickup truck, and more faith than money. I still remember the day we signed the papers. The realtor smiled politely, clearly doubting we'd last a year with the mortgage payments. But my husband squeezed my hand and whispered, "We'll make it work, Maggie. One day, this will be our forever home." And somehow we did. We turned that house into a living, breathing symbol of everything we'd ever fought for. We built the porch ourselves, staying up late with a flashlight and a hammer, our laughter echoing through the empty street. Every summer, we'd repaint the walls, arguing over colors and making up over ice cream when the sun went down. When the children came along, that house became their universe, a place of scraped knees, birthday candles, and bedtime stories. After he passed, that house became my lifeline. Every corner carried his memory. His favorite chair still faced the window, where he used to read the morning paper. His toolbox sat untouched in the garage, the same way he left it. On quiet nights, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the wind moving through the magnolia tree we planted together, and I'd almost believe he was still sitting beside me. When my daughter suggested I move in with her, temporarily, I hesitated. "It's just until you recover from the surgery. Mom," she said sweetly, "you shouldn't be alone in that big house." She even promised to keep an eye on things while I was away, to handle the bills, the maintenance, and the mail. I wanted to believe her. She was my daughter, my only child. The idea that she could ever harm me never even crossed my mind. The first few weeks at her house were fine. She made me tea, helped with my medication, and always had an opinion about what I should eat, wear, or watch. I thought she was just being protective, maybe even overprotective. But over time, little things started to change. She took my phone to help organize my contacts. My mail started going directly to her address. She told me she'd simplified my bank access so she could handle bills faster. "You need rest, Mom," she'd say with that patient smile that now, looking back, seems more like a mask. I let her do it all because I thought it was love. I thought she was helping. Weeks turned to months. My independence, something I had guarded fiercely all my life, quietly slipped away without me noticing. Every decision went through her. Every visitor had to be approved. She even told my friend Carol, who had known me for 30 years, that I wasn't feeling well enough for company. I didn't know about that until much later. One afternoon, she walked into my room with a folder full of papers. "Just some insurance updates," she said casually. "You need to sign these so I can manage the policies while you recover." I didn't think twice. I signed where she pointed, grateful she was handling things. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and walked away humming to herself. It was months later, long after I had recovered, when I realized how deep her control had gone. I noticed small things first: my old checkbook missing, my calls about the house unanswered by the property manager, her growing impatience whenever I asked about my finances. Then one morning, I overheard her husband on the phone. His voice was sharp, businesslike. "Yes, the transfer went through, $480,000. It's already in our account." I froze. At first, I told myself I had misunderstood. But when I asked her about it that evening, Her reaction said everything. She didn't deny it. She didn't even look guilty. She just sighed and said, "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The house was too much for you. I sold it. You'll thank me later." Sold it. The words hit harder than any blow I'd ever taken. That house wasn't just a building. It was my marriage, my motherhood, my entire history, gone like it meant nothing. I felt small, powerless, and foolish for trusting her so blindly. But what she didn't know, what even I had almost forgotten, was that my husband had quietly made a change to the property deed years before he passed. He'd told me once, during one of his quiet, reflective evenings, "Maggie, I just want to make sure you're protected. No one should ever be able to take what's ours away from you." I brushed it off, thinking it was just another one of his careful habits. He'd been meticulous about everything, wills, papers, savings, always a step ahead of me. Turns out, he had gone to the lawyer and amended the deed, placing it under a trust that required both of our signatures for any transfer. So when my daughter had me sign those documents, thinking she'd outsmarted her aging mother, she had no idea that her plan was built on sand. Her signature, her entire sale, meant nothing without mine. I didn't know all of this yet, but deep down, I felt something wasn't over. My husband had always told me, if something feels wrong, don't let it go. Dig until you find the truth. And that's exactly what I intended to do. When I found out what my daughter had done, something inside me changed. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was something colder, steadier, like a lock clicking into place. The kind of resolve that only comes when you realize someone you love has mistaken your silence for weakness. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply went to the small cabinet in my room, pulled out my late husband's old address book, and flipped through the pages until I found the number written in his neat, steady handwriting. Mr. Harold Jacobs, Family Law. Mr. Jacobs had been our lawyer for more than 30 years. He'd helped us buy our first store, draft our wills, and eventually set up the trust that secured our estate. He'd attended my husband's funeral, quietly shaking my hand with a look that said more than words ever could. When I dialed his number, my fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something closer to awakening. He answered on the third ring. "Mr. Jacobs speaking." "Harold," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. "It's Margaret Harris." There was a pause. "Margaret," he said softly, "it's been too long. How are you holding up?" "I've had better weeks," I said dryly. He must have caught the edge in my tone, because his voice grew more serious. "What's happened?" I hesitated for a moment. Saying it out loud felt like admitting that the foundation of my family had cracked. "It's my daughter," I said finally. "She sold the house." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Then, in a tone far quieter than before, he said, "Mrs. Harris, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. Bring every document she had you sign, every single one." When I hung up the phone, the strength I had been holding on to all day faltered for a moment. My body sank into the chair, and I stared at the folder she had left me, the one filled with the papers I had signed so blindly. My name, written over and over again, in black ink that now looked like betrayal. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and thought of my husband. I could almost see him there, in his old cardigan, glasses perched on his nose, quietly reviewing the bills by the kitchen lamp. He'd always been so careful, so deliberate, and I prayed, silently, that somewhere in that carefulness, he had seen this coming. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Jacobs' office early. The building looked the same as it had for decades. The brass nameplate, the old oak door, the faint smell of paper and polish. His secretary led me in without question. He stood as I entered, the same familiar kind face, framed by silver hair. "Margaret," he said warmly, shaking my hand, "it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." I gave a faint, tired smile. "I wish that too." We sat across from each other at his desk, the same desk where my husband and I had once signed the documents for our will. I placed the folder in front of him, and he adjusted his glasses before carefully opening it. The only sounds were the faint rustle of paper and the ticking of the wall clock. As he flipped through each page, his brow furrowed deeper. "These signatures," he murmured. "Yes, they're yours. But something's missing." I leaned forward. "Missing? What do you mean?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "This isn't the full deed file. These are partial transaction documents. She didn't have the core deed. You couldn't have given it to her because..." He stopped, pushing his chair back slightly. Without another word, he turned to the old filing cabinet behind him. His fingers trailed over the folders until he found one with my husband's handwriting on the label, "Harris Property, Revised Ownership." He opened it carefully, as if handling something sacred, and laid a set of yellowing papers on the desk. "Your husband came to me about 7 years ago," Mr. Jacobs said quietly. "He wanted to make sure you were protected. He told me he trusted your daughter, but he wanted to plan for unforeseen circumstances. He moved the property into a trust that could only be altered by both your signatures, yours and his. Not even your daughter's power of attorney could override it." I stared at the papers in disbelief. "He never told me. He wanted to spare you the worry," Mr. Jacobs said. "He said you'd never suspect anyone in your family would try to take what you built together. But he also said, and I remember his exact words, 'I've seen what greed can do to good people. I won't leave her unprotected.'" My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "So," I said finally, "what happens now?" Mr. Jacobs folded his hands on the desk. "Now, Mrs. Harris, we get your house back." The words felt surreal, like something out of a dream. He leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "We'll start by filing an injunction to freeze the sale. Because she sold something that wasn't legally hers, the contract can be voided. Once the court reviews the trust, the buyers will have no choice but to return ownership to you. You won't lose a single brick." I blinked back tears. "I don't want to hurt her. Harold, I just want my home back." He nodded. "You won't have to hurt her. The law will do that for you." There was something almost poetic about that. After all the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, justice was coming not through vengeance, but through truth. He stood and handed me the old deed, the one with my husband's signature still visible in fading blue ink. "Keep this safe," he said. "Your husband's foresight may have just saved your legacy." As I held the document, my hands trembled. The paper was old, fragile, but it carried the weight of every promise my husband had ever made to me. Walking out of that office, I felt taller, lighter, stronger. For the first time in months, I wasn't the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who was about to reclaim what was rightfully hers. And somewhere deep in my heart, I could almost hear my husband's voice, quiet, certain, and proud. "I told you, Maggie, I wouldn't let anyone take it from you." The news hit my daughter like a stone through glass. I didn't tell her myself. Mr. Jacobs filed the injunction quietly, and within days, her husband's account was frozen. The buyers were notified, the transaction reversed, and the deed legally restored under my name. But the moment she found out, she came storming into my room like a storm breaking loose. Her hair was unkempt, her face flushed, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I couldn't name. Fear, anger, maybe even shame hiding behind pride. "Mom, what did you do?" she demanded, slamming the door behind her. I didn't even flinch. I was sitting by the window, sipping tea, the morning light cutting through the curtains. "I did what I should have done months ago," I said calmly. "I talked to your father's lawyer." Her voice rose. "You had no right to interfere. You're not even well enough to handle all this legal nonsense." I turned to face her, setting the cup down carefully on the saucer. "Not well enough to handle it." I repeated, "You managed to forge my name on papers and sell my house without my permission, but I'm the one who isn't capable." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand, Mom. I was trying to help you. You're getting older. That house was too much work, too many memories." Too many memories for you, I interrupted sharply. Not for me. Her eyes darted away, her composure faltering for the first time. I just wanted what's best for you, she muttered, though the conviction in her tone had cracked. No, I said, standing slowly, steadying myself on the armrest. You wanted what's easiest for you. There's a difference. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, thick with everything that had gone unsaid for years. She had always been the ambitious one, the problem solver, the girl who wanted control over everything she touched. But somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that people aren't problems to be managed, especially not her own mother. You could have lost everything, she said finally, her voice trembling. If Dad hadn't changed that deed, you'd be out on the street. I looked her straight in the eye. If your father hadn't changed that deed, I would have still had faith that my daughter wouldn't betray me. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, she looked small, human, vulnerable. You don't know what it's like, she said quietly. After Dad died, I watched you fade. I thought you'd never recover. I thought if I took control, I could fix things. I shook my head slowly. Fixing things doesn't mean taking them away. You didn't fix me, sweetheart. You broke what was left. She sank into the chair across from me, rubbing her temples as if trying to erase the situation from her mind. So what happens now? She asked. You're going to drag your own daughter to court. I sighed. The court's already handling it. The sale was void. You'll have to return the money, and your name will be cleared if you cooperate. And if I don't, she said bitterly, then you'll face the consequences your actions brought. I replied gently but firmly. You're my daughter, but that doesn't make you immune from accountability. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment I saw the little girl she once was, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, who used to curl up beside me on the couch and ask about her father's stories. Somewhere between those days and this moment, she'd lost her way. You always loved the house more than me, she whispered suddenly, and that cut deeper than any of her earlier words. I walked to the window and looked outside at the garden that wasn't mine anymore, at least not yet, not physically. I never loved the house more than you, I said quietly. I loved what the house represented. Your father's dreams, our memories, our family. You were part of that. But when you sold it, it felt like you sold us, too. She pressed her lips together, blinking fast. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said softly, but intentions don't erase actions. The silence that followed was heavy but necessary, the kind of silence that forces people to face themselves. Finally, she stood, her voice low. So what do you want from me? Nothing, I said. Not money, not apologies. I just want you to understand what respect means, because it's not about obedience or control. It's about trust, and you broke that. She nodded slowly, her chin trembling. And if I try to earn it back? I smiled sadly. Then maybe, someday, this house will be yours again. But not through a sale or a signature, through the kind of heart your father hoped you'd have. She looked down, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I was protecting you. And I thought you were too, I said gently, but protection isn't power. It's love. For a brief moment, the years of distance between us seemed to shrink. She reached out, hesitated, then took my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. I squeezed them, not to forgive her completely, but to remind her that I still could. Mr. Jacobs called later that evening. It's done, he said. The property is back in your name. You're officially the owner again. I hung up and looked at my daughter, who was still sitting quietly across from me, her eyes swollen and red. It's over, I said softly, but that doesn't mean it has to be the end. She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. For what? I asked. For not giving up on me. I smiled faintly. That's one thing your father and I promised we'd never do. A week later, I stood in front of my old house again. The magnolia tree was still there, its branches heavy with white blossoms, swaying softly in the spring air. The paint had faded a little more, and a few boards on the porch needed replacing, but to me, it was still beautiful, familiar in a way no luxury condo or retirement home could ever be. Mr. Jacobs met me by the gate, a stack of legal documents tucked neatly under his arm. It's all finalized, he said with a smile. You're officially the sole trustee and owner again. Your daughter's name has been removed from all related filings. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My eyes burned with quiet relief. Thank you, Harold, I said softly. For everything. He smiled. Don't thank me. Thank your husband. He planned for this. He trusted you to carry his judgment forward. When he left, I walked up the front steps slowly, my hand brushing the wooden railing he'd once sanded himself. Each step creaked in greeting, as if the house had been waiting for me all along. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and time. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, falling on the same floral rug we bought decades ago, the one my husband used to grumble about, but secretly loved. I wandered through each room, letting the silence settle around me. The walls whispered memories, my son's laughter, my husband's voice calling from the kitchen, my daughter's footsteps running down the stairs on Christmas morning. Everything I'd feared losing was still here. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about what it stood for: resilience, foresight, and the quiet strength that love leaves behind. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the magnolia blossoms drifting down around me like soft snow. For the first time in months, the air felt light again. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. Just still. When my daughter called later that night, I hesitated before answering. Her voice was quiet, careful. Mom. Yes, dear. I just wanted to say, thank you for not pressing charges. I didn't need to, I said gently. You've already faced the part that hurts most, the realization. She was silent for a while. Then, her voice cracked. I don't know how to fix what I did. You start by not running from it, I said. You come back, you help me repaint these walls, you plant new flowers in the garden. You learn what your father and I learned the hard way, that what's built with love can't be bought, and what's taken without respect will never bring peace. I'd like that, she whispered. I know you would. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch long after dark. The moonlight spilled across the yard, touching every corner of the place we had once called home. I thought about all the years my husband had spent worrying over the future, his habit of locking up every document, his endless questions about wills and titles. I used to tease him for it. You plan like we're running an empire, I'd say, and he'd laugh. Well, maybe we are. Now I realized he hadn't just been preparing for death. He'd been protecting the living. In the following weeks, I started putting the house back together piece by piece. I replaced the locks, repainted the shutters, and even hired a gardener to trim the magnolia tree. But I left one branch untouched, the one closest to the porch, the one that stretched toward the window where my husband used to sit. Sometimes I'd talk to him while I worked. You were right, you old fool, I'd say with a smile. You always were. The neighbors began stopping by again, Mrs. Evans with her peach cobbler, Tom from down the street offering to fix the fence. They'd all heard some version of the story, whispered through town, but no one pried. They just smiled softly, as if to say, you're home. And maybe that was the lesson in all of this. Home isn't just a place, it's a promise. One you make to yourself, to stand tall even when those you love most forget who you are. As the days passed, I noticed small changes in myself. I no longer double-checked my reflection for the woman I used to be. I no longer felt the weight of my age like a burden. I started walking every morning again, down the same road where my husband and I used to take our evening strolls. One morning, I saw my daughter's car pull into the driveway. She stepped out with paint buckets and gardening gloves. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two stubborn women finally learning how to rebuild. Ready to work, she asked, a tentative smile breaking through the guilt still lingering in her eyes. I nodded. Always. She walked up the porch steps and hesitated, then hugged me, not the quick, distracted kind of hug she'd given me for years, but a real one. Firm. Trembling. Honest. That day, we repainted the living room together. She talked about her kids, her job, her mistakes. I listened, not to forgive her immediately, but to understand the road she was trying to walk back on. By sunset, the room looked different, brighter, lived in again. Before she left, she turned to me and said, Dad would have been proud of you. I smiled. No, sweetheart, he'd have been proud of us. When she drove away, I stood on the porch again, watching the light fade behind the magnolia tree. The house seemed to breathe with me, calm, alive, at peace. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt since my husband passed. Not victory, not revenge, but restoration. That day, I learned something money can never teach. Ownership isn't just about papers and property, it's about respect. My daughter sold a house, thinking it was only walls and land. But what she really sold was trust, something no document can buy back. If you're listening to this, remember, protecting what you've built doesn't make you selfish. It makes you wise. Never be afraid to set boundaries, even with those you love most. Because love without respect turns into control, and control disguised as care is just another form of greed. If this story reminded you of someone in your life, or a moment where you had to choose self-respect over silence, share your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if you believe that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt with actions, not words, then like this video, subscribe, and help keep these stories alive. Because every story, no matter how painful, carries one truth: strength isn't inherited. It's earned.